I do have my name affiliated with Pima County, but actually this is what I do in my spare time, on my weekends and in my evenings. I work on something called a Flora, and a Flora is just looking at, trying to understand the full plant diversity of a particular area. And so, the area that I'm looking at is the 4,000 acres that comprise the Cienega Creek Natural Preserve. It's owned and managed by Pima County. And if you haven't been there, you have certainly crossed over it. Because this is Interstate Highway 10, and this is the place where the railroad used to cross the highway, but recently they've removed the railroad. I mean, this is like a major infrastructure project that was torn up for years. And the creek that flows underneath that big dip there, that was one of the most hazardous places in the interstate highway system, is Cienega Creek. It's a portion of the creek that's usually dry, but that is part of the preserve just upstream and downstream of that location. So the place that that this preserve is located in is downstream of the BLM La Cienega. So it's at a lower elevation, 3,100 to 3,900 feet. So it's fairly low and doesn't vary a lot in that area. And it's been called, a long time ago, they used to call it the Cienega Gap. The reason they called it that was because this was the place that people got access to the Tucson Basin through. If they were coming from the San Pedro River, it was the lowest place to cross between the Whetstones and the Santa Ritas on the south and the Rincon Mountains on the north. So that's why they perceived it as the Cienega Gap. And today it's where the interstate highway system is located, and it was where the railroad was first constructed in 1880. So it's a very important transportation low spot. But it's also important on a continental scale. So this is, you know, the botany, really, or the plant communities of North America. And the Cordilleran Gap is really this area in southern Arizona, which is basically the I-10 corridor. It's the low spot in the Cordillera that runs from North America into Mexico and South America. And it's the place where, you know, the Sky Islands archipelago and all the mountain ranges are broken up. And it's the space where the Sonoran Desert and the Chihuahuan Desert meet on an east-west transect. So that preserve actually cuts across the ecotone, if you will, between the Sonoran Desert and the Chihuahuan Desert. So that's part of the intriguing setting of this that got me interested in doing it. For plant nerds, it's also the type locality for giant saccatone. And I don't know, Ron Tiller, yes, Mr. Saccatone is here. That's for you. So I think. Well, you know, that was when he was working on his graduate studies. So I think, was it Pringle? Was it Pringle that came around in the 1880s? I think it was a botanist named Pringle who did the collection in the 1880s. But during my tenure, I started at the Cienega Creek Preserve in 1986, and they said, do what you can to protect it. And one of the things that I accomplished through it was not fun, was getting rid of some of the livestock in the perennial reaches of Cienega Creek. And there was a very, you know, just incredible change in the plant communities, but also in what I was seeing just in terms of the herbs and stuff. And I didn't know very much about that kind of thing, but I was trying to get other people interested in documenting that. So here's some photographs that me and David Scalera took at the same place over time. So if you look at this little peak here, that's this little peak there, that's that little peak there, and now, you know, 2003, you can't see it. So very rapid vegetational change and equally dramatic changes on the uplands. Steve Archer talked about shrub encroachment. You know, this is an area where the uplands used to be grasslands, and now they're creosote bush kind of desert. Here's a winter photograph of Cienega Creek with the rincons in the background, the riparian area in here. So the uplands now are mainly, as I said, creosote brush. So huge, huge changes in the plant communities here. Also a subject of great interest of mine. You know, so what does the plant diversity look like now compared to back then? We do actually have a little bit of data, and we're going to find out how things have changed. Another thing that spurred my interest in doing the Flora is knowing from the work that Pima County and Pima County Association of Governments have been doing looking at the dry up of the perennial reach. Are we losing wetland plant species? We know we're losing some of the, the cottonwoods and so forth, but are we actually losing diversity? That's a different question. So my objectives are to, again, characterize the plant diversity of the area, look at that in comparison to other riparian floras. There's a nice flora that's been done for the San Pedro River. There's also one that Catherine Mounts did for the Santa Cruz River. So how does Cienega Creek, look in comparison to those? Also to inventory the types of invasive species that we have today. There was an earlier study about invasive species there that I'll talk a little bit about. And then again, just to look at whether some of the aquatic species that I did get people to collect earlier in the late 90s and early 2000s, are those still around? So one of the first things I did was to look at what are in collections through the SignNet system of herbaria. That's 27 different herbaria in southwest and northwest of Mexico, southwestern U.S. and northwest Mexico. Almost all the collections are UVA herbarium or ASU in that network. What I found out is that most of the collections occurred after 2000. I think I was successful in getting some people to collect there, and Julie Stromberg's students have done some good efforts there, both kind of in the preserve but also outside. So, I've had a plant list for many years, and that already had like 239 species, but that's different than documenting them with specimens that actually go into a long-term place where they can be studied by future scholars. So within the preserve boundaries, only 130 species have been collected at any time. And this is the kind of histogram this is by 20-year decadal increments. This is 1920, this is 2010. And so you can see most of the collections before I started were very recent, with some collections in 1920s, and then the Pringle ones go back to the 1880s. What I found out is that mostly what people have been collecting there have been kind of cool looking riparian herbs, and that like cottonwood, grape, some really heavy hitter like riparian species, walnut, they're not in there, nobody's sampling. So, yay, that makes it easy for me, I can get those species. Actually, it's quite difficult to get cottonwoods when it's flowering. The flowers are way up high and that sort of thing. But anyway, so yeah, many common species have not been documented there ever, even since 1880. And then most of the collections are biased towards the main channel. Most people are walking along the perennial root going, oh, this is cool, and they're not looking anywhere else. And then almost all the collections are in 4 months, March, April, September, and October. These are great months to collect, but they're not going to tell you the whole story. So far, I've spent 200 person hours out there, or that's including volunteers who've come with me at times. We've made 500, greater than 500 press specimens, basically. Not all of those are going into the herbarium collection. So far, I've got one species that's new to Pima County, and then 2 species that have not been collected in greater than 100 years, and a number of exotic species. So just to hit the highlights, here's one of the new species, not found previously in Pima County. It's a datura that has an oak-shaped leaf, and it's got a very cool fruit. I don't know if is it evident here? Yeah. Look at the spikes on that thing right there. Yeah, very cool spike things, and they're kind of hanging differently on the plant. So you can tell it by the leaves only, but the fruit really nail it. So that was fun to find. In terms of invasive species, the U.S. Association of Governments, at my request years ago, had done an invasive species kind of inventory. They spent about a week out in the field. They documented all these different invasive species right here. There are some of the ones that you'd expect. There's watercress along the stream. Yeah, there's Layman's lovegrass. It's all over the valley. There's some interesting ones like, let's see, that panic. The blue panic was planted because of a range kind of experiment. The UVA said, hey, why don't you try this? You get pasture grass. So there's this one little area where it exists, and it really hasn't moved out of that, which is the good news. London rocket, that kind of stuff. So there's the sort of things that you'd expect. One of these species on the list that they had in the tag work, it was done in 2003, we think we might have eradicated from the preserve since then through the work of volunteers and also Pima County employees like David Scalero and now Doug Siegel. And just recently, I hope they've gotten rid of the last arundo. Arundo has been a big invasive species in California.
Good job.
These are the species that we're picking up that had not been documented before. Parkinsonia aculeata, that's the Mexican palo verde. There's just a couple of those. These species are fairly common in some of the wetter areas. This is the yellow bluestem. I just heard about that like a couple of years ago here at this symposium. I think some people said, oh, we're seeing that on Fort Huachuca. Well, I found, one plant, and there's probably more, but not huge amounts. We found one population so far, Brassica ternifolia. It's turning up all over the Tucson Basin. It's surprising there's not more there. Maybe I just haven't been blundering across it. One plant of fountain grass, and a lot more to come in the upper watershed. I mean, this watershed up here in the southern ring ponds, there's more behind it waiting to come in, but so far I've just seen one. And then this Mathiella parviflora, it's a mustard, it's got a weird looking fruit. It's starting to show up all over the Tucson Basin. We're seeing a few plants out in the preserve. So there are some species that are missing. Huachuca water umbel was found by Priscilla Titus along the perennial reach through some diligent efforts that she and her husband made. We have gone back out to look for it, and a number of other people keep their eyes peeled for it as they walk along the stream. Nobody's seen it since then, so we think it may have been extirpated. This Biden's laevis, which is this kind of aquatic-looking plant, some qualified botanists, not myself, had been out there and seen it in the 90s and early 2000s. I haven't seen it yet. Maybe it's there, still looking. Columbine, that's kind of like a one-off thing. I've seen one plant in 25 years and never another one there. So, I think that just happens. It's kind of odd. And then this African rue, I think somebody planted a long time ago. It used to be along the creek. I don't see it anymore. Maybe I haven't found it yet. It's just, I don't know. So this is a lot of work to do. And I'm not the best qualified person to do it, but it's an interesting job. It's a very, you go out and you collect specimens and you press them. Here's a field press, this is what people did in like the 1800s and the 1700s. There's only been about 100, 150 years of work here in this part of our basin. But in other parts of the world, people have been doing floristics for 300 years, and they actually have a good grip on, what is the plant diversity of a particular region. We really don't have as good a record right here, as some parts of, Africa and, colonial India and so forth that have been studied for, centuries. So what is the diversity? You can't just get that from plot data. Most of the range monitoring plots, they're only looking at a certain number of species. A lot of the long-term ecological plots, they're only looking at the perennial species and not the herbaceous. So I'm thinking, might be worth giving somebody, some future scholar, a good data set. And I know that I'm learning a lot more about the distribution of plants, how to identify plants, and kind of getting a sense of how plastic plants are to different substrates. One of the things I keep track of is what is the plant growing on? Does it occur in more than one type of geomorphic setting, that kind of thing. So when I'm done, I'll be able to play lots of games with GIS and that sort of thing, because they're all references to locations. But if you have suggestions for me, because I've never done this kind of thing before, I would love to talk to you. I've got some unknown plants here. If somebody wants to help identify, I'm all ears. So, thank you.
Comment. I think you said the elevation range is 3,100 to 3,900. That overlaps the elevation range of the Verde Valley, which is a much more northern latitude. And Julie Stromberg's had a grad student that did a number of transects, multiple transects with a lot of plant detail, and it'd be interesting to compare. Plus, there's a lot of, in the herbaceous undergrowth, there's a lot of non-natives that they make up a lot of the biomass on the Verde, like Bermuda, for instance, and many other things.
Johnson.
Browns, but Julie's grad student said, even though there's a lot of biomass that's non-native, there's a huge amount of diversity in the herbaceous component.
Right.
I was wondering if it's that similar there.
It is. It absolutely is, and it's not all along the main stem. I found certain plants, I'm only so far finding on the tributaries, and then when you go to the uplands, I mean, it's really changed my idea of plant diversity, because there's some, there's some really rich pockets of, thin soils on bedrock, and some plants only occur on certain bedrock types. So to me, it's very much changing my ideas about the diversity of the landscape. It's the diversity of these habitat settings, the diversity of topography, the fact that you've got some really shaded slopes and rocky slopes. I mean, this is part of the drivers of diversity. It's not just the fact that there's water along the stream, and it's making me there's I mean, I thought I was okay on plants. I can like major riparian plants, got it down, right? But I mean, there's so many more plants, and even within a species, the varieties that you might see and so forth. There's so much more diversity out there than I realized.
Do you have any explanation for why Biden's labius isn't there? I know you listed that.
Yes.
And there's this giant seed load here that's flushing down into there with every flood. The seeds, just
Well,
go forever.
they may not transport very well. We don't know.
What is that?
Bringing them on their socks.
Yeah.
Like your sticks.
And actually, there may not be much coming from the upper watershed either.
Spanish needle.
There's a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of plants there, but remember, even the fish, the fish don't get down there very often. It was years and years and years before the fish showed up. So I don't know. I'm interested in that question, and I think it was Gail Morris a couple of years ago when she talked to this group about butterflies. I think she mentioned, or somebody else did here, that they weren't seeing Biden's layers, I believe, in wherever their study area was. So I don't know. Okay, you back there, and then you, and then Jeff.
I was just curious, you were talking about the concept of only growing certain bedrock and whatnot. Are the environmental conditions pretty well documented and characterized for all these plants? I mean, could you, like, for instance, with a presence-absence map, kind of map out bedrock, for instance?
Well, we have good bedrock maps already,
Yeah.
so we would do that. I think one could choose some plants. I mean, there are some plants that are only
Like
going to
soil
be growing on
textures,
certain.
soil moisture,
Yeah, bedrock
soil
outcrops.
rockiness, all those kind of.
But I wouldn't use plants to map the bedrocks, no. Like,
Right.
go backward like that.
But it
yeah.
does bring up a point about preserving the stage.
Yes.
The stage being kind of the soil geology.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's why, that's part of my curiosity. It's also part of my, the way that I'm reporting the sites is, what is the rock type or soil type, and then that I observe in the field, and then I can compare that to GIS stuff later. But also, what is the setting? Is it a terrace? Is it a floodplain? Is it the main channel? And then what are the types of plants?
I guess I'm just wondering, like, all these herbarium samples, and if they're, like, if people have mapped out, like, all these different plants in the landscape.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you're visiting and you're observing all this stuff, but if all you had was, like, this big database of plants in the landscape, could you, are the plants characterized well enough that you could, from that, infer the environmental conditions?
People certainly do that with species distribution models, but I would say that for many species, we really don't have a clue. And even the range, we don't adequately know the range of a lot of these plant species, and we certainly don't know the environmental characteristics well. I mean, if you look at, many of you are probably used to looking at the distributions of animals, and have you noticed how many are along the roads, right? It makes it look like roads are great for wildlife because that's where you see the dead ones. So there's a lot of bias in the sampling, and I see that, you know, the valley bottoms, unless they have water around them, there's very little data. A lot of it is along roadways, along places that are highly recreated. There's also been sort of this bias towards, like, let's document a unit of the Coronado National Forest or a unit of a mountain range, but you don't really look down in the valley floor that much. That's what makes the work that Elizabeth Makings did for the San Pedro River Valley unusual. I mean, that's a riparian flora, and there's not very many of those yet at this point, so good for her. There was, yeah, was it you?
Yeah. Were you planning to do any reintroductions of the water humble at any time in the future?
We certainly would like to do that, and one of the needs is to have a Huachuca water humble recovery plan. That's one of the things that maybe is kind of, earlier when we explored that with Fish and Wildlife Service, there was some desire not to do any reintroductions right away. That may have changed, but now, you know, there was an effort to do a recovery plan process, and so we'll see. We certainly want to do it, and we certainly will have a few places where we can do that.
Do you get any Carex Ultra down there?
Yes, we
Good.
certainly do, yes. Yeah, a number of plants. And they tend to be at places that used to be discharging springs.